Chaverim. Shalom. Okay, das Lied we do this morning, number 1, number 4. Hello. We do number 4 so you can play and then you can go away. Von einem Morschentan do dieser I just want to make one speech for 30 seconds, for 5 seconds. Please don't make me stop every bar for dynamics. You know the piece.
Leonard Bernstein rehearses the Israel Philharmonic in Mahler's Das Lied von Erde. The tenor soloist is Rene Kollo, and the alto, seen now at their first rehearsal, is Christa Ludwig.
This is so much slower than I ever do it. The immer schneller comes here. We haven't even come to that. Okay, before 14, please. 5 bars. La 3, 4.
Wird fröhlich aufgescheucht aus dem Wind, über Gräser wandern, die Hufe sind zerstampfen, jeden Sturm die Hiebe und den Nüstern, ein Flattern im Taumel seine Mähnen danken.
It doesn't matter, nobody knows, you know, who can hear the words anyway. The main thing is to hear high, do an octave higher. Hey! And at least we know you're singing. Otherwise, there's no way to think that is. Yeah. Okay, the same thing, one more time. This is always impossible. Nobody can be heard in this. 5 before 14. 14. Yeah, the same place.
Stampfen, jedem Sturm die Hüte, gesunkene Blüten, Heide flattern im Taumel seine Mähne lampen,
That's the best we can do.
Eine Sonne webt die Gestalten, spiegelt sie blanken Wasser wieder.
In a break during the hectic rehearsal period in Tel Aviv, Leonard Bernstein sat down at a piano to film this impromptu introduction to Das Lied von Erde, the Song of the Earth.
What can one say about Das Lied von Erde? It says everything itself. I find it very hard to talk about it because For one thing, I love it so much. And for another thing, since it has text from beginning to end, it tells it all. But maybe a few words about it might not be amiss, because it's a very commonly misunderstood piece, in the sense that it consists of 6 songs of varying lengths, varying from a 3-minute little song in the middle to almost a half-hour long song at the end, which is commonly thought of as a sort of big symphonic song cycle. But it's more than a song cycle. It's a great unified work, and in the deepest sense, it's Mahler's greatest symphony, even though it's a symphony for 2 voices and orchestra. And what makes it so is its shape. It's not a collection of songs, but a constellation of songs. In other words, these songs are put together in a way which develops certain themes through connective tissue, through images and symbols which recur, both verbal and musical. The use of the pentatonic scale throughout, of course, since it's a basically oriented work. The pentatonic scale. One of the earliest themes one hears in the strings is those 3 notes, and the last theme you hear at the very end of the piece is the same 3 notes backwards. And of course, the very famous ewig motive at the end. Ewig, ewig appears also in the very first song and is developed throughout. You hear it in the first song this way. And the second song, the oboe solo begins with that very ewig theme, or motive, that two-note motive. But it's not just the musical elements or the verbal elements, it's a combination of both that make the development so symphonic and so complete. It makes it different from any other work of Mahler, any other of his symphonies. All the other works, in one way or another, are dealing with the problem of mortality, of innocence, of the search for the faith that one had in youth. And the way Mahler goes about searching for this in his 9 marvelous symphonies is a very personal way. In other words, he has recourse to his own personal symbols, post horns, bird calls that he remembers from his youth, street songs that were sung in his little town during his childhood, the sound of bugle calls from the barracks, gypsies, whatever. In this work, however, while he's dealing more or less with the same subjects, the same fight against the certainty of death, and therefore the bitterness and brevity of life, and the need for faith to counteract all this, he is dealing with these subjects in a more idealized and, so to speak, abstracted way, because the text is couched, of course, in Chinese poetry. He doesn't use Knabenwunderhorn songs or texts. He doesn't use the elements of his own youth and his own past. So in a sense, this is the essential Mahler. It's therefore, I think, his greatest work. I think most people would agree. It deals with all those same Mahlerian problems, but in its own very special, ethereal, oriental way. And those themes, of course, are, as I say, mortality, his enormous love of the world as nature, and the tug of having to leave it, the ensuing bitterness of life, and the making do, the muddling through, getting through life as best one can, mainly, in Mahler's case, by music, by song. Das Lied von der Erde. Originally, he wanted to entitle it Das Lied vom Jammer der Erde, the song of the sorrow of the earth, or the woe, or the agony, or whatever you call it. He did use that in the title of the first song, which is called Das Trinklied von Jammer der Erde, the drinking song of the woe, of earthly woe. But in that original title, you have the element of the song, which is, of course, Mahler's great weapon, with which he fought all his life, his music. You have the element of the earth, which implies nature and all the forces ranged against him and for him, all the beauties of nature. And, of course, the woe, the bitterness of it all. And all this constructs for us a picture of dualism, a duality which evolves really from Mahler the man and is very evident in all his works. There's a kind of schizophrenic quality in Mahler, in his life, a divisiveness, a duality in his very nature and in the way he lived, being both a naive and a sophisticate, being a provincial and an international figure, being both Jewish and Christian, being both a conductor and a composer, all those things. But all these dualisms in his own life show up in all his music, and never more than in this great final work, which of course he never heard himself. That's almost the most tragic thing about this work, that he didn't live to hear it performed or to perform it himself. The first 5 of the 6 songs actually deal with dualisms and contrasts in one way or another. Mainly the duality of illusion versus reality. What is real? And it deals with, or they deal, these first 5 songs, with finding ways of coming to terms with the problem of mortality, ways of living, muddling through. And in the great 6th song, the farewell, the Abschied, which is the long one and the masterpiece, somehow the true reality is found, and the dualities are once and for all resolved, unified. And Mahler finds his peace, as do we all who perform or listen to this great work. I suppose it might be useful to run briefly through the 6 songs just to get a sense of their progression. As you know, the 6 songs are sung by 2 soloists, and a tenor and an alto, who alternate, beginning with the tenor and ending with the alto. And so this first song
which is called the drinking song of earthly sorrow, is sung by the tenor. This is one of the most powerful pieces of music I know. It's an extraordinary song, which is both savage and lyrical, extremely strong, violent, waltzy at the same time, in a Mahlerian way, full of darkness, full of false cheer, and even containing a hallucination. The form of the song really is a kind of Chinese torture, because what is set up for us is a scene of a company of people who have gathered together for convivial reasons and who are going to drink. And the singer says, well, there's the wine, it's all ready to drink, but wait, don't drink yet. I have to sing you a song first about how horrible life is. And he stops everybody from drinking. I want this song to enter into your soul. And he tells about when sorrow comes, song dies, gardens are laid waste, joy, everything disappears. And then he sings his famous refrain, Dunkel ist das Leben, ist der Tod. Dark is life, dark is death. Again, the music resumes very savagely, and he says, there's so much wine. He addresses the host. He says, your cellar is bursting with wonderful wine, and here I have my lute. We have music, and these things go together very well. Again, here's the Chinese torture. He's encouraging everybody to have a good time, and a good full cup of wine is worth more than all the riches of the earth put together. But dark is life, dark is death. And then he says, he turns philosophical. He says the firmament, the universe, remains forever and renews itself every spring. But you, man, how long do you last? Not a bare 100 years do you have a chance to enjoy these tawdry toys of life, these rotten amusements that you call life. Look, then he has his hallucination. He says, look over there in the moonshine, in the graveyard. There's crouching a horrible monster. It's an ape. He's howling into the night. He's howling into the sweet scents of life. And at this terrifying climax, listen to him howling, listen to him howling. Now, take your wine. Now you may drink. Dark is life, dark is death. It's an extraordinary song. The second song, which is sung by the alto, is called The Lonely One in Autumn. And we now have spring contrasted with autumn. And again, a duality is set up in which the loneliness and paleness and coldness and shadowiness of autumn, the frost on the grasses, the dismal light, the dying leaves, are all contrasted with the idea of the sun of love, which does not shine and does not come to dry my tears. This song is musically, by the way, one of the most interesting because it's so bare, spare, rather reminiscent of the Pimen scene in Boris Godunov, Mussorgsky, in its winding violin line with a solitary oboe against it. Very chamber music-y. And by the way, the whole piece is, in spite of the fact that it uses an enormous orchestra. It uses that orchestra in a very chamberish way, so that only groups of it are used at any given time. As a matter of fact, there is only one song in which the tuba is used at all, and there is only one song in which the trumpet section is used at all as a section. In the great final song, there are no trumpets. In other words, Mahler chooses his orchestra very carefully, and this is one of the things that makes it so difficult to perform and to prepare, because you have to prepare an enormous orchestra as though you were preparing a string quartet. In other words, everybody in the orchestra must know what everybody else is doing, and they must play with enormous sensitivity to what everybody else is playing. The third song, again sung by the tenor, is the tiny one, the most overtly Chinese one, purely pentatonic, and it's a tiny little miniature song, reminding one of a Chinese print. As a matter of fact, most of these songs remind one of Chinese prints. Certainly that lonely one in autumn brings to mind many Chinese prints of fading colors and pastels and muted tones. This particular Chinese print of the third song, which is called Of Youth, about youth, paints a little picture which is bright and cheerful of very well-mannered young people, highly cultivated, Mandarin kind of people, gathered together in a little pavilion of green and white porcelain, where they are conversing, drinking, having cultivated chatter. And this pavilion is set on a little island in the middle of a pond, which is reached by a little arched bridge. And all this scene is reflected in the still waters of the pond, so that you see it simultaneously upside down. Again, the duality. You see the image and you see its reflection. So what is implied really here is that all these lovely people having such a well-mannered, good time, drinking and chatting, some are writing verses, poetry, are also an illusion.
Alles auf dem Kopf stehend in dem Pavillon aus grünem und aus weißem Porzellan, wie ein Halbmond geht die Brücke, umgekehrt der Bogen, eine schön gekleidet, trinken, plaudern.
Okay. And so now we move from one song of charm to another song of charm, number 4, which is called Von der Schönheit, of beauty, which is again sung by the alto. This is not quite so short as the little song about the pavilion, but it is again a charming Chinese print, another way of muddling through, of getting through life with beauty. And the duality that is set up in this one is, first of all, a contrast of female and male beauty. We start out by seeing a picture of beautiful young maidens in silken clothes, as the people in the little pavilion were also dressed, extraordinarily pretty and young, picking blossoms on the riverbank. And this is developed with descriptions of the sun and their clothing and the odors that are spread by the blossoms and of the girls themselves. And suddenly into the middle of this rushes a bunch of handsome youths on horseback. And these horses come trampling the grasses and the blossoms and the flowers, to the delight of the girls, certainly. They don't object at all. And male beauty is here extolled. The most beautiful of the girls and the most handsome of the young men exchange looks of love, but they do it in a highly formalized way in order not to give it all away. Again, the touch of illusion and reality invades this song. And it ends on a note of very tender charm and utter beauty. The fifth song, again sung by the tenor, is called The Drunken One in Spring. And this is, again, a very active song in which the tenor is telling us that if life is only a dream, why all the fuss? Why complain? Why not just drink? Have a good time. It's spring. He says, I fill my belly with wine until I sing. And then when I can't drink anymore because I'm so full, I go home and sleep it off. I have a wonderful sleep, and then I wake up and I fill my glass again, and I drink again, and I sing again. And somewhere in the middle of this song, he enters a dreamlike state in which he hears a bird. And he asks the bird, has spring come? And the bird says, yes, it has. And so the spring has come, but finally he says, what do I care? What's the spring to me? Let me just stay drunk.
I'm sorry to take this time, but we have to do it now or never. Und Nacht. Okay, aus tiefsten nine, please. Right on 9. Okay.
Well, now those 5 songs have prepared us, really, for the great final one, the farewell. This song falls into 3 main sections, each one introduced by recitativo, and the second and third sections separated by a long symphonic episode for the orchestra alone, in which the ultimate struggle takes place, a very painful piece of music, so that when she returns with her third and final recitativo, it is in absolute calm and serenity. And it tells of the parting of 2 friends who drink a farewell drink, and one wanders off into eternity. Those are the 6 songs. Now, what is it that actually connects these 6 songs and makes them so much of one piece? It's mainly a series of symbols and images which recur.
To take one example only, the 3 tenor songs all make reference to the image of wine.
Which is referred to, not just referred to, I mean, the wine is the substance, the chief image. And the image stands for the whole concept of intoxication and self-narcotizing as a modus vivendi, as a way of living with what we call reality. In the first song, as I told you, it's a matter of making oneself aware of why one is drinking. In the second one, we have this cultivated, well-mannered group which are drinking as part of living social life, communal existence, well-bred. And in the third one, the drunken man in spring, we have a really all-out rough assertion of this theme, which says, I'm not even interested in the spring or in that little bird. I just want to remain intoxicated and happy and sing. Of course, that is, we must never forget that that is the main symbol and Mahler's main symbol, music. That third song, by the way, is a rather timely kind of hippie text, which unfortunately conveys something of the passivity that is all too prevalent in our times. But that is an aside. That really is not pertinent to the work. The alto does not refer to wine in any of her songs, except in the Abschied, where the final song, where all the symbols are drawn together. Almost every image that has been enunciated in the preceding 5 songs finds its way somehow into the 6th. And drinking is mentioned in the 6th only at that moment of farewell, where the friend offers his friend the final drink of farewell, which is in this case a bitter cup. It is no longer enjoyment of life, it's no longer muddling through, but something rather like the bitter cup of Christ's agony in the garden. In this connection, it's interesting to note that the final lines are by Mahler himself. These are not original Chinese poetry. All the words beginning Die liebe Erde to the end were written by Mahler. The dear earth blooms over and over again eternally in spring, and the light comes again after the winter. Everywhere, everywhere, forever and ever. And it ends, of course, with the seemingly interminable repetition of the word ewig, ewig, forever And the final ewig, of course, is not resolved, and one is left floating in Ewigkeit, in eternity. It's a very Eastern idea and a mystical one, not unrelated to the ending of the Ninth Symphony, with which it's very often compared. But it's very different from the Ninth Symphony, even though both endings involve the same mystic achievement, which is the loss of ego, the merging with the cosmos, the loss of personal identity, and the gaining of total identity thereby. The great Bergsonian idea of the all and the nothing being equal, the great nothing toward which all Eastern mysticisms aspire. But it's different from the Ninth Symphony because there one has the feeling of resignation and that one has finally bowed one's head to this inevitability, which is comforting, but it's nothing like the end of Das Lied, in which death is really embraced, and death has become a synonym for eternity. In other words, it is no longer dying, but in some magic way, immortality has been achieved, has been found. I always feel when I finish a performance of this piece, or even a rehearsal of it, the words of Keats' Nightingale ringing in my ears, that particular bit of the ode that says, "Darkling I listen, and for many a time I have been half in love with easeful death." That is almost exactly the quality of the end of this piece. Now more than ever seems it rich to die, to cease upon the midnight with no pain, while thou art pouring forth thy soul abroad in such an ecstasy. That nightingale, which indeed is pouring forth its soul in this whole last section of the Abschied, to cease upon the midnight, ewig, floating in eternity, all über all. And then when it's all over and it's all died away, in that silence, I always hear the last two lines of Keats's ode. Was it a vision or a waking dream? Fled is that music. Do I wake or sleep? And that is the essence. That is all of Das Lied von Erde.